I'm Chris-Rachael, your Kitchen Overlord, back for day 3 of my South by Southwest challenge to do a video a day for a week, which I'm choosing to do about Hobbit food because, hey, I wrote a cookbook about it. I know a little something about the subject. So, day 1 was breakfast in a little historical context. Day 2 was second breakfast. Day 3 is Elevenses. And man, the internet goes nuts for Elevenses. I think that's because it's not a real meal, and it's a time that you can just plug whatever fantasy foods you want into it. What I decided to do was give it a little bit of historical context based on ovens of the period. So back before everybody had an electric oven or a gas oven, the way that you would actually heat up your oven is you'd shove a bunch of fire into it, or whatever, wood, coal, whatever you were heating it with, get it as hot as you can, and then bake things in the order of temperature that they needed. And it was a little bit of a loose system. They had things like paper that you could put into the oven and see how quickly it browned as far as gauging temperature, but it wasn't an exact thing. But you, through time and experience, learned this is when you put in the things that have to be cooked hot, medium, cooler, etc., etc. By about 10 a.m., your oven's cooling down. It would be modern temperatures somewhere between 300 to 375, as opposed to the really searing hot 500 degrees earlier. And that is a great temperature at which to bake quick breads. So things like seed cake, for example, which is not a cake and is not made with the seeds that most people think of. Seed cake, this is one of my favorite things that I researched when doing an Unexpected Cookbook. I spent a crazy amount of time with historical research and interlibrary alone and whatnot. It's actually a loaf, so, quick bread loaf, that is full of caraway seeds. Caraway seeds have gone out of fashion. They used to be very, very popular in baked goods. It is a darn shame they've gone out of fashion because they're great. They're in the same flavor family as anise, so there's a slight licorice flavor without it being, well, aggressively licoricey. And the seed cake is basically a pound cake. So it doesn't sound to modern people like those are two flavors that would go together. Try it. Seriously. Tolkien loved it. You will too. It is fantastic stuff. So to me, Elevenses is all about lighter, delicate things that you would stay home to eat if you didn't feel like going out on an adventure. Things that might need a little bit more tending in the oven. Light things is an emphasis there because you don't want it to be so heavy that it's going to fill you up before luncheon. So you might have a fairly thin slice of seed cake and a thin part of a Chelsea bun or something along those lines. So I, in my cookbook, have a whole lot of quick bread recipes. There's a great ginger oat bread example, for example, as well. I think that if you're going to do something with Elevenses, you could theoretically let it overlap a little bit with afternoon tea, because afternoon tea was also a very delicate time. But afternoon tea to me is more cookies and tiny sweet pies and other, not the durable hand pies, but like little ones that'll fall apart if you're not touching them. Again, delicate things, tea sandwiches, stuff along those lines. Whereas this to me is a little bit more working class, a little bit more things that when you're done with them, you can leave in a bread box, what I would have used at the time, wrap it up in some cheesecloth, and keep eating for 2 or 3 days in a row. Because, as I've mentioned in the previous 2 videos, people in that era, if they weren't in the very elite wealthy class, were spending 2/3 of their income on food, which is just unimaginable to us today. So it's not like you were making a different cake every day. You would be making one and then eating it all week long, because that's how much money you had. Even something like flour adds up after a while. These are also, to me with Elevenses, relatively inexpensive foods because they're not your big staple meals, breakfast, lunch, either dinner or supper, depending on where you live. So it's more of a treat sort of food. I like to picture it as kind of, like I said, a morning equivalent of afternoon tea, but with heartier foods. So if you want to give it a try, if you're doing a Hobbit party at home and you want to come up with something for Elevenses, I would contrast it with second breakfast if I was you, rather than trying to contrast it with afternoon tea. Because afternoon tea people are going to have a certain set expectations for, whereas nobody knows what to think of with Elevenses. The other great thing about Elevenses, the way that I mentally envision it, which again is a lot of quick breads, things that were fast to make at the time, as long as your oven was already hot, and are fast to make now, is that, it doesn't require that much work. These days, if you want to make 4 different types of quick breads and put them in the oven, great! You can make them all at once and have them all ready to go as long as they have about the same, level of fluid in the, not level of fluid, but moisture content and things like that, so they'll bake about evenly and you put them in there evenly. If you want to make it historically accurate as well, this is an important bit of context. Tolkien prohibited all New World foods from the Shire other than coffee, tobacco, and potatoes. Now, that seems pretty obvious. You're not going to put a tomato or a chili pepper or something like that in your Hobbit quick bread. The thing that people forget is that that includes two really popular ingredients that show up in almost all baked goods these days: chocolate and vanilla. Both of those are New World foods. So if you're wondering what to substitute, if you want to make some light, fluffy, delicate breads, quick breads again, for your Elevenses, almond extract was hugely popular during that period. Also tastes great in the seed cake I mentioned earlier. Look into alternative extracts along those lines, or as most people would do, go without an extract and just actually use some native flavors. Like they would use a lot of berries, apples showed up in an awful lot of things, carrots. Carrot cake would actually be a very, very accurate thing to make for that sort of thing, and carrot cake, not what modern people think of as carrot cake. Go look up something that would be more like a hearty carrot loaf, which people were eating carrot cake from medieval times forward, back when sugar was really expensive. Carrots are naturally sweet. Grate up some carrots, possibly grate up some apples if they're in season as well. Those will add a natural sweetness, and so you don't need as much of what would have been very expensive sugar. By the Victorian era that Tolkien is basing all this on, sugar was super cheap and coming in from all over the world, so they weren't really that worried about minimizing the amount of sugar, but they weren't also making things like a cream cheese icing. So their idea of carrot cake, again, would be actually a little sweeter than what we would probably eat now, because they loved their imported sugar, but wouldn't have what Americans think of as an icing. If anything, there would be a light glaze on top of it. I hope that helps you out. Again, if you're doing a party yourself, I think you ought to have some hand pies there for second breakfast, and some lighter, fluffy breads for and things along those lines for your Elevenses, and just have both of them there as a contrast and tell people why. This is for where you're going out, this is from when you're staying in, this is, beautiful sunny day food, this is rainy day food. Either way, you're going to have something to please all different types of audiences. Another great advantage of these, and I mentioned this in my book repeatedly, but it bears repeating. I said repeating 3 times in a row now. I bet I can repeat it again. Anyway, you can make almost all of these things vegan very, very easily by substituting coconut oil for butter. You're not going to make any of it gluten-free very easily, because it's all a bunch of bread products. I apologize to people out there that really need that in their diet. Not everything can be made gluten-free, I'm sorry. But there's lots of other good things that are gluten-free coming up later on when we talk about supper and dinner. So stay tuned tomorrow when we'll be talking about lunch.